piece, I had kind of this whole bigger thing imagined, but I was too nervous about running out of time, so I just kind of condensed my presentation into a poem of sorts about knowing your rights, which is fact and fiction, and sometimes it can be like a guessing game, so that's kind of how I drew that in. It's called What I Never Learned in AP History. Everybody knows, right? Know your rights instead of having them read to you. Where do you begin? The amendments, the Bill of Rights, George Washington, the Constitution for kids. Once I remembered checks and balances and how to memorize for tests. Study the government and all its parts. Congress in 1776. But what are my rights? And why can't I remember? I come across the Universal Declaration for Human Rights in 200 different languages. It speaks of beautiful things. The right to live, the right to safety, to travel, to education, the freedom to be you. And finally, the right to your rights protected by a local international order? But what happens when your rights are bought, sold, traded, and used and abused by those in power? By those meant to keep order, for beautiful things to happen? Well, they never taught me about greed and corruption and applied methods. Only what happens when everything goes right. Only when the checks check out and the scales and the balances are even. Or maybe they did, but I was too busy studying to get an A, to get into a good college, which I'll never be able to afford. Memorizing facts to get an education, and pile up loans into my early 40s, to my grave. Was that my right? Sure, it was my choice. Only blinded by the promise of something better. Only to graduate into a cycle of seemingly never-ending corruption, greed, unrest, and apathy until now. Know your rights and use them. Know your options and choose. Whereas the facts and figures are good to know, but only if you apply them. Don't focus on the A or constant perfection. I did. This life isn't perfect. And this world has so far to go. But we have the right to change it. And that's one right I do know.
Yeah. Woo! Nice.
My name's McGowan.
Thank you, Brooke.